All right, so this is the Purchasing Reliability Working Group for January the 19th, 2022. Just to FYI that Marshall is on CEO Shadow this week, so I can help facilitate this meeting. The first agenda item is just an update on how the Azure to GCP migration is going. We have a target date of February the 5th. We're about 83% complete on this. Currently what's in progress is we have a scheduled maintenance window already scheduled and put onto our status page. We're working through the production readiness review. We're working with NTAPs to have a Zora setup so we can test in production prior to failover. And then we're also working on putting basic monitoring in place. What's next is, as we work through the production readiness review, there's a few comments in the merge request that we need to address. And then we're also finishing our Kubernetes setup for monitoring. James, you're the one that's driving most of this. Is there anything that I might have missed there?
No, I think, yeah, I think that's probably everything. We're going to perform some tests as well once we have a Zora ready in there. And yeah, and we probably have to still ping some people in the readiness review. I know some business stakeholders are missing there, so we can get more reviews. Yeah, and I think that's probably everything.
Quick question, does that Zora setup have a matching Salesforce sandbox, and is customers not going to hook into that?
Yeah, I think that's the idea. It's just a quick, relatively quick test, but it's the same sandbox. It's like if it was a staging, basically.
Cool. Can we just make sure that somewhere in the testing plan, there's like, we saw the web direct go into Salesforce, preferably with all of its quote data? Yeah,
and also after there's some post checks after the failover, and you know, we're going to check Salesforce and that everything goes through as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions on this? Otherwise, we'll move on to number 2. So number 2 is, I wanted to provide an update on some of the direction for addressing the exit criteria of data models, touch points between integrations and services are documented and consistent. I think there's a few different steps we need to take here. First, I think we need to document our current state and then start documenting our future state, implementing our future state, and then resyncing all data and resolving any sort of outstanding data issues, and then introducing a change management process and then introducing more of an automated contract testing so that it continues to stay in sync. I'll dive into the first one in terms of work needed for documenting our current state. So I think our current state sort of breaks down into roughly 3 buckets. We have our data models, we have our request or retry or sync mechanisms, and then we have our end-to-end data flows of how data is actually flowing across all of our systems. So starting with data models, I've created a Google Sheet where we can start documenting all of the data models for the different systems. You should be able to see some of the work that Tyler's already done for customers, where we have the database schema pasted in here. So you can see table name, field names, the data types, and sort of what the relationship is. And then we're going to do the same thing for GitLab, because customers interfaces closely with GitLab. We don't need to do it for all of the GitLab tables, obviously, because there's hundreds and hundreds of tables in there, but just the ones that are relevant to customers. And then for Zora, Mark's already gone ahead and done this. And he's added in all of the different tables that are used in Zora. We should do something similar for Salesforce and for Platypus as well. Jack, any thoughts on doing this for Salesforce?
Happy to do it for Salesforce. This should be, again, would be a small subset of Salesforce that it touches, but we can get all the relevant tables in here, especially the ones that come over from the customers.6 services. Those are the most important ones for sure. I can have someone on my team fill this in.
That'd be awesome. Thank you. Once we do have all of these data models filled out, then we should identify the purpose for each table or field, just so that we can ensure that across these different systems, we're using the same field for the same purpose. And then we should start mapping the relationship, which fields map to the other systems, which ones are sort of the reference IDs between systems. And Jack, you've got a few comments.
I do. Second, don't we have documentation on Zora to customers dot on the dueling subscription service? Isn't that, I thought that existed. I can try and help look for it, but I'm pretty sure that there was a decent docs on that. Secondly, when we go through this exercise, which is cool, we've been down this road before, it's just, do we have in scope the thoughts on, as much as I know customers dot has a data model, but a lot of it is duplicative with Zora and other places. I know we're going to need something for like licensing. But would you consider that, Jerome, that any type of like, oh, hey, we should just use Zora or throw out the extra data, the extra tables? Is that something you would see in the future state analysis?
So answering your first question, I think we started some documentation between customers dot and Zora, but it's likely out of date now. So we sort of need to redo it. Your second question about removing the data model in customers dot outside of licensing, are you talking about adding more tables or removing tables from customers dot?
To my understanding, we obviously have Zora, which is our subscription master. All of our orders will deposit a subscription object in Zora with all the fixings. We're actually looking to improve that data model so we can handle ramps and such. But then we have alongside of it a subscription object in customers dot, which is like a weird cousin of it that's very rudimentary, but I get how people got there. But having these two separate subscription tables, the second they get out of sync, it causes all sorts of problems downstream. We've known this for a while. So in my mind, there should be one subscription master where everything talks in and out of that. And obviously I say we're going to need some homegrown system, in my opinion, to handle licensing. That's something that I'm pretty sure we should do, but it should talk to Zora, not its own internal database model or its own internal subscription model. Does that make sense?
It does. So I think there's a couple of parts to this. I think the first one is ensuring that we have the same tables in that are used across systems in both Zora and customers dot. And we define one as a single source of truth and simply replicate downstream for caching purposes or performance purposes.
I'll take a local cache of the source. That's cool. What I'm talking like, Zora takes like 8 or I don't know how many objects. It's a lot, probably like 10 objects to describe a subscription, while customers dot takes 1. It's like 1 with orders. So it's a Zora has a much more robust. It has all the data we need. And that translation from the full-blown data model in Zora to the truncated one in customers dot, I think that also causes a lot of problems. So it's more like, do we get rid of the subscriptions light in customers dot and just go point directly at Zora, or a copy of Zora? That's fine for all future work in this realm.
I think the other thing there we'll have to consider is, how does what we have in Zora map to like logical GitLab.com and then self-managed? Like, how do we translate who the subscription belongs to? Because we don't keep that much information in Zora in relation to, like, say, namespace or instance or whatever. I think that would be an important thing for us to figure out.
I like that distinction, Tatiana. It's that in my mind is part of like licensing, and like however we keep, yes, we have a subscription that goes over the subscription system, how we connect it out to our customer for everything like GitLab needs to provision and do that. That's licensing, cloud licensing. That's our system in my mind. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think cloud licensing is for self-managed today and not necessarily for SaaS. So I think that's,
yeah. It'd be great if it was all in one place, but whatever, we'll take them as they can go.
I think to your comment earlier, Jack, about Zora having the full-blown data model and customers dot having like a truncated version of it, I think specifically you're likely talking about our orders table. I think this is where James and Tyler, you can probably chime in on where you'd like to take that table, whether it's deprecating it and sort of replicating the full-blown data model that Zora has, or a different path.
Yeah, I know when we were looking at like doing the exercise for Zora as SSOT like over a year ago, we looked into this, and I think our recommendation at that time was to eventually sunset the orders table, at least for paid subscriptions. We still have a need for something like that for trials, but that was the idea then. And I think that's probably still you know, a worthy goal to work towards it. I know we have, you know, probably now some things to think about with quarterly reconciliations that, you know, we use that table heavily for that. So we have to think about solutions for that now, but I still think it's probably worth exploring removing it. And then we can also look, you know, get on the path of a caching layer on our side that is a replication of Zora, but that almost seems like it could be a separate topic.
Yeah, I think we should be able to iterate on this, and at first just focus on using Zora as some sort of database for us, and then introduce caching. Caching is a bit more complicated. Zora doesn't have enough callbacks for us to know when things change, so things may be not up to date there. So it's possible, but we need to think a bit more about how we do caching. However, that doesn't mean that we can use Zora as a single source of truth. And right now, I think Jack described it really well. We have the orders table, and it's a single table, but it represents multiple objects. It's some sort of hybrid. And it's not a one-to-one mapping to Zora. That's the biggest issue, and that's the sort of source of the sync issues that we have as well. So I think we should be able to iterate and maybe just sort of get rid of that table and use Zora, and then think about caching a bit later.
Well, I think all of that makes a lot of sense. And as we're documenting, like right now, we're just focused on documenting current state, but as we're documenting future state, this picture will become more clear in terms of what direction we're going to push towards. I'll move on to the next part of this, which is request, retry, and sync mechanisms. We need to get a good idea of how each of the systems sends out their requests, and if those requests fail, how they do retries and how they do full syncs with other dependent systems. I haven't given this a ton of thought yet, so I'm not sure exactly what the ask would be here, but I think it's something that we would need to start looking into.
I think it's definitely worth for us documenting this. I think this is an area that we haven't been documenting very well. Most people don't know about how we do the queuing. So we have a bunch of queues. We have retry mechanism, which is exponential. We have priorities. We have quite a few things there, thanks to Sidekick, which is what we use at a much larger scale in GitLab.com as well. I think so in customers., it normally takes the blame, but it's actually the one thing that works really well for us. The syncing issues are normally related to the data model, and not because we haven't retried, because we do. We do retry. We have queues, and we can analyze those queues. We have a UI for Sidekick that lets you check. You know, it has graphs, and it has each of the queues, so you can retry individual jobs. And another example is the Zora callbacks. When they, I know they have retries in the Zora side. I think there are 3, but once they get to us, we cache that, because in Sidekick, it gets cached, and something happens, it will retry, and we have that job there for the future as well. I think that's not very well documented, and I know it took the blame a few times because I know we have syncing issues, but it's not because we do not sync, but because we may sync things that do not exist on one side of the equation, or it may be wrong. So I think that's the main problem, which is more fundamental, really, and it has to do with the data model.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Would it help if we don't necessarily define a structure for how we want to write out the request, retry, or sync mechanisms, but we just have each team just start to put together what that looks like in their systems? So for instance, for Zora, this might just be a few bullet points of how retries work in Zora, whereas for customers dot, it's probably a lot more complex going into how Sidekick works.
I think that makes sense. We just recently created an internal doc on the customers dot side, like a docs page for Sidekick, and we can just add to that, I think, for the documentation there, so it persists longer term. And we can even document some of the Zora things that apply on our side in customers dot as well.
Cool, that sounds good. I'll move on to end-to-end data flows. Currently, we have a couple of diagrams. We have the quote to cash diagrams, which are put together by the NTAPS team. And then we also have Jack, what you've linked to.
That's just, I want to throw that out, an old one, but a good one. That was when we had this discussion almost August 2020, I believe. It just talked about, it's a lot of the same themes in here and some of the discussions we already had. I just wanted to link that there. It's also where the thing you referenced, a lot of that collateral moved into the handbook, but just that's kind of like, if you would like to know more, take a look in that prezo.
That's great. Ideally, we have this systems diagram that is able to reference specific payloads, because each of the arrows between systems represents a payload that's being sent from one system to another. And we need to ensure that that payload actually gets received and processed correctly downstream. So I'm not sure what the best way to do this is. Maybe Christopher Nelson, you've got some ideas here, but is it possible to like annotate each of the arrows with a link to a payload, and we can have technical docs behind all of this?
Yes, I mean, I think that's what we talked about before, Jerome, and I think that, you know, getting to that level of detail is probably the next iteration.
Awesome. I think we're probably not at the payload step yet. We're still early on defining data models and request, retry, sync mechanisms, but we'll eventually get there. But it's good that we have this plan. So that's everything for documenting the current state. After we've got the current state documented, then we can start documenting future state for all of these things again, and then eventually implementing it. Jack, you've got a comment under documenting future state.
Sure. Just like we did a year and a half ago, when we go into this reconsider, hey, what do we have? What do we want? What was brought up is always the option of is there anything we could purchase to replace some portion of what we're talking about, all the way from storefronts to an e-commerce engine to something that integrates naturally with Zora. I just want do you think that is currently, how much effort are we going to put into that? Zero or some amount of effort to just see what's out there?
Yeah, so good point. This is a separate track that Justin's asked me to start looking into. And I think this is also an ask from sales as well. You know, is there something that we could take off the shelf that provides us with all of this functionality. I think my high level impression right now is that a lot of the things that we take off the shelf probably already come with their own backend for billing and subscription management. And we'd have to find something that integrates well with what we have with Zora so that it works with all of the different ways which our customers purchase. So if you have ideas of products that do that, I'm open to just researching them further.
Fantastic. We'll go and I'll follow up with you and Justin on that other track, but could not agree more. It has to integrate with Zora. I just think customers dot is like 4 different things stapled together right now. And I'm not saying there's nothing that's going to replace all of that functionality, but there might be something that replaces a chunk of it. Just want to make sure we go through that exercise.
Yeah, that makes sense. And this also spins off into a separate conversation about team structures for fulfillment, which I can cover near the end of this call, which I think, we have fulfillment broken down into smaller parts, and hopefully a team structure we're hoping to get to at the end of this year. Moving on to implementing future state, I don't think we have any action items there. Resyncing all data and resolving outstanding data issues. I think after we have the correct data models in place, we're going to have to do a global resync across all systems. So just something to keep in mind. And the purpose of this is to ensure that all systems are in sync and that there are no sort of holes within our data. And if there are holes within our data, which I know there will be, we'll need to figure out how to address it. Next, we have introducing change management process. Steve, who's not on the call, I'll verbalize his comment. So noting that the infra change management process for GitLab.com is documented at the link below. I'm noting this for reference, but expect that the change management process for customers likely needs to be driven more by SOX expectations. And the GitLab.com change management process isn't intended to cover that. It might be useful, but something driven more to align with IT and business apps groups is probably what's needed. So I think that's a really good call out. Christopher, do you have any thoughts on this? Like driving a change management from SOX standpoint?
Sorry, muted. Are you talking about just from a general approach perspective?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think we mentioned this is that, we're very much trying to build out a change management process that is, really integrated with the tool, with GitLab itself and merge requests. And our goal is integrate it with workflow and, minimum viable. Like, I mean, we really want to continue to negotiate with our internal auditors to say, how can we make it as lightweight as possible and as natural as possible? Those are sort of our 2 guiding principles.
That sounds good. Jack, you've got a comment there.
Just a question, Christopher, because obviously we already use MRs in all these teams today. Do we know the delta between what we're doing today and what would check the box for compliance?
Yeah, I mean, I think the delta is then including some business stakeholders in some of the approvals and getting their ability to, preview those or review and then sign off through those types of approvals. That's really the main delta, Jack.
Cool. I know some teams are doing that, the business owner sign off piece.
Yeah.
And a great segue. We could go right into thank you, fulfillment, whoever 3 or 4 MRs in the last week or 2 since we last had this meeting. My team has been brought in to review the change, and it's started a lot of great conversations. really helped us make sure that that flows into Salesforce. That was immediate value from this meeting. So thank you, whoever delivered that message.
Yeah, definitely. We have room for improvement there. We do have some checkbox specifically for Salesforce as well in the merge request, but those are sometimes ignored. The best thing we have right now is a system we have called Danger, which automatically assigns people, and you can see the people there. So for example, we modify the database, then a database review needs to happen, and there's a signal there in the merge request, difficult to ignore. So an improvement would be to add business stakeholders that we are missing now to that danger thing, because then we won't easily miss it at all.
James, would you be able to log an issue to add that to Danger?
Will do, yeah.
Thank you. And then next we have introducing automated API contract testing. I think that actually links really closely with Danger. We could use DangerBot to do that, or another testing framework to do that. I'm not sure, Vinci, if you've got any ideas here about end-to-end API contract testing across systems like Salesforce or Zora.
We actually are trying to have an OKR this quarter on a quality level to actually automate API contract testing. Now, that is not with respect to fulfillment, though. I can link the issues, but that is more like in first initiative you're going to take for contract testing. So based on how that OKR turns out, we should be able to add value here as well. I can link the issue and the OKRs here for broader visibility. One example of those is here. This is one example. And this is with respect to GitLab services and GitLab real applications. So similarly, we're trying to have this across many different aspects. We have right now for Q1, we're looking for GitLab. We're also looking for Verify. This is the first time we're doing it. So based on this, we should be able to build more on top of this one.
I assume
what time frame, sorry, what time frame are you looking for doing this in fulfillment?
Probably in the next quarter. I don't think we'll get to it this quarter. I think this quarter will be focused on getting the data models right and implementing it. But I guess in parallel, we could start looking at having automation around it as well. So either this quarter, late this quarter, or early next quarter.
Let me also take an action item on this one to see how we can collaborate on this one effectively.
That sounds great. With the example that you provided for Gitly, are you seeing similar sort of issues that we're dealing with here? And that's sort of the reason why your team's pushing for this?
Yes, integration testing is always a much of a challenge, especially for this team as well. When it comes to even Jira integration, I mean, many other applications, hence the reason why we're picking this one up. But this is the first time we're doing it, so there's a lot of learning curve that we're going to have as we start doing this one.
That makes sense.
I think one thing that happens in Gitly is when something changes there, then some of the nodes in GitLab.com may not be up to date, and that's a typical issue that the API changes and they don't know basically. One thing we do have right now in customers is so we have integration tests. They normally cache the requests via VCR. However, we do have a daily pipeline that runs without the VCR. So those tests call Zora and call Salesforce. And if something happens, something changes in Zora, for example, they release a new version and a field changes, we will find out. We have that. that integration test that will fail automatically. I don't think that that's happening, for instance, with Italy now.
I don't have a lot of context on that one, but I would assume so.
Jack, I think you've got the next point under G.
Yep. I think that all the things we're talking about is after we do the migration of the infrastructure, that this discussion is a good use of this forum. But what do you think, Jerome, in your mind? How are we going to balance it with documenting the current state, future state, with all the immediate needs we have for Matterhorn, all the cloud licensing work that's still underway? Do you see that coming into this meeting, or should we keep them separate?
I think the short answer is we're carving out capacity for this, and we're doing it very deliberately because I think we can keep running with initiative after initiative, but unless we invest in this technical foundation, we're going to sort of keep running into the same problems that we've already been dealing with. So when it comes to something like Matterhorn, you know, I hear across all of the different functions, we should move forward with orders and ramps. We should do things properly. And it's sort of the same thing for other initiatives as well. So in terms of carving out capacity, fulfillment is currently taking on about like 3 to 4 rocks from our prioritization meeting. This is one of the rocks. So, you know, 1 out of 4, 25%, something like that. Now, your next question of sort of, should we keep this as more of a separate track than some of these other initiatives? I think we should. We should focus this meeting on, I think, the longer term architecture that we want to get to. And I think we can bring in items from the other tracks if there are fires to put out. Like for instance, in QSR, we're seeing issues with the Zora data, and that links closely with how we actually structure these data models. So I think like in those cases, it'd be appropriate to bring it in, but we have separate meetings for those other initiatives as well.
Thank you. I like that. I know in the past, when it comes to all these projects, it's very easy to get all of our meetings and wires crossed, and we wind up talking about the same thing in every meeting. So I like that approach. Thank you.
Related to this, I'll jump down to number 4. We have 2 meetings that actually discuss these topics right now. So we have the Purchasing Reliability Working Group, which is what we're currently all attending. And then we have a separate Order to Cache Fusion meeting where we have a lot of the engineers and business system analysts, et cetera, that attend that meeting. So I wanted to ask the group, where should we have these technical discussions taking place? Should we have them in this meeting directly, or should we do that in the other meeting?
I think it goes back to the previous one of what's being discussed where, because in my mind, the working group is really to this body of work that is really focused on, you know, this analysis, this sort of, you know, foundational understanding of the systems, where the Order to Cache Fusion meeting, I mean, this is where we should be talking about the ramps. We should be talking about Matterhorn. Like this is the, you know, business as usual meeting. So in my mind, you know, we're, you know, this is something I remember Jack and I, we had to sort out a while back ago. It's like, if we let the meetings get fused, then some subjects suck up the meetings. So we really need to have separate tracks for that. And do you agree, Jack?
Completely agree. I did like Jerome's bit where we can break down the 4th wall if there's a really shining example of something that would play into how we think about these systems strategically, because that often does happen. But I feel like we should just raise that as a hey, more information to help make decisions at the strategic level. Keep all the work on the ongoing projects we're already working on down in those other meetings or in those other meetings. So agreed.
Okay. I am actually running late to another call that I'm actually hosting, getting pinged right now. So thank you so much. Great call.
Thanks, Christopher. I think as a last item, I wanted to talk through a team structure doc, which we're currently working on. I'll link that in the agenda. So as we've gone through the roadmap meetings, it's clear that we've got a lot more scope than we can actually handle. So I think there are short-term things that we can do to address that, such as borrow requests, but I think in the long term, I don't see the number of requests slowing down. So I'd like to start thinking about what the longer term structure of fulfillment looks like. So what I've got linked in the doc is more of what that longer term structure that I'd like our team to work towards. The first thing is creating what we're calling a foundations team. And the foundations team really focuses on everything to do with Zora, wrapping, abstracting it, understanding all the business logic, and basically preparing Zora for use for all of these different experiences that are built on top of it. The easiest way to look at this is through this diagram that I've got here. So we have Zora, which is maintained by NTAPS and Finance. And the foundations team really takes care of wrapping this and abstracting away all of the APIs so that they're ready for all of these experiences. This team can also take care of things like a lot of the infra dev work that we're implementing right now. And once we have this abstracted way, then we have different experiences. So the first experience and the easiest to understand is self-service purchasing. So this is really the e-commerce experience and optimizing the checkout flows here. So Jack, when you were previously talking about, is there an e-com tool that we'd be able to just plug in? If we did that and took that off the shelf, that would possibly replace this. Next, we have channel purchasing. So we have Edisty and Arrow, which is one of the projects we're currently asked to work on. But we also have things like GCP and AWS, which are on the horizon as well, and integrating with those marketplaces. So this team here is likely more of an API team that works with those different integrations. Next, we have billing and subscription management. So anytime someone needs to update their credit card or update their existing purchases, that would be what this team builds out. We also have provision, which is currently called license. And this takes care of post-purchase, ensuring that the different, that our customers get exactly what they purchase. So this would span across plans, users, CI minute storage for both SaaS and self-managed, just ensuring that everything is being delivered. And then next we have consumption/reporting. This is currently called utilization, and we might stick with the utilization name, but this team really focuses on surfacing up to customers what their usage is. And then I think in the longer term, this starts to look more like AWS billing and cost management and forecasting, where once you have a good idea of what your usage is, then you can start doing more of the planning aspects of usage. And then lastly, we have billing and support and admin tools. This is something that's overlooked a lot right now, and we want to make sure that we have the correct tools in place for our support teams to be able to service our customers. Anyways, I wanted to present this because this is how we're thinking about longer term structure within fulfillment. Obviously, this requires approval and budget and everything else, but I wanted to share this first in case anyone has any thoughts.
My one thought, Jerome, and like there is, you've got channel and self-serve separated out. We've talked a lot before in all these forums about like an orders and orders and order. And currently we allow our customers to go through different paths. And so making sure that we have kind of like a single order flow, meaning that and all the different paths can interact with that one order flow, to me seems like a decent idea to implement. And so I would just think about it there where, because a channel purchase interacting with a subscription in Zora shouldn't look that much different than someone coming in from the web store or someone coming in from Zora through Salesforce. Those should all speak the same language at the end of the day, especially if we want them to be able to interact. With the main example being someone buys something in Salesforce, but they can still interact with that subscription through the web store like we can today, right? So that's I think about if those should be 1 box or 2 boxes, my one piece of feedback. But besides that, really like it.
Yeah, and that's sort of the purpose behind the foundations team. The foundations team is defining what is being standardized. So the foundations team is essentially, we're thinking of it as it's this purchasing reliability working group that we put together right now. Can we convert that into a foundations team that takes care of the data models and that are sort of the custodians of all of our interactions with Zora? So if we have an order defined as a certain data model, whatever channel that you plug in, so whatever purchasing channel you plug in, whether that be through a channel marketplace, self-serve, or Salesforce, those should all plug in there. And it should all be standardized.
Love it.
And I think the other thing is then we're like looking at the UI, the UX experience is maybe more front end, right? So if, for example, self-service, purchasing, at some point, if we get it to a place where we don't have to worry about how the data gets into Zora because foundations team is taking care of that, we could potentially hand that off to the growth team, for example, so they can run experiments and build whatever they want to.
This sort of gets back to our conversations on Edisty, where there was a path about integrating Edisty directly into Zora. And the reason why I had some hesitation there was because it then starts to build another path into Zora. And basically, we then have 3 different paths into Zora through customers.edisty and through Salesforce. All systems doing something slightly different with different validations or no validations in place, which means that the data in Zora starts to look off. Depending on which angle you look at it from. So that's why I had hesitation there, and why I was pushing for us to start looking at this data model sort of approach first, and then be able to sort of build out towards more of a standardized interface.
I know this bleeds into kind of things we've asked for already, but if we had we already have an orders interface, the existing one, customers dot, right? The subscribe service. Have we, and we talked about extending that. Has anyone been able to take a test channel order, and we'll probably have to ETL it a little bit, but drop it into the subscribe service in a sandbox and see what comes out the other side? Have we gotten that far yet? Because I think there might be a way to iterate, Jerome, where it's saying like, hey, we have a unified order service, it's just customers dot, or what we do today, extend it a little bit, but then we still need to be thinking about what is the full version of this that we should be moving towards. We might be able to learn along the way.
Yeah, it's a good call out. We do have a test payload from NTAPS. I'm going to look into the staffing side to see who can take it on. So that's on my plate right now. But I agree, it's a great way to iterate.
And I'll throw in there just because I would love to help expedite that, either myself or someone on my team. And I bet someone from Enterprise Apps would be willing to help translate the raw data coming from our e-distributor to speak Zora. Again, probably a little bit of ETL needed, but it's probably not far off. Then we'll see what happens when we drop it down there. Happy to help do that translation.
That makes sense. And sorry, y'all, I realized that this isn't an hour-long meeting. I kept thinking it was. So we're significantly over time. But I think we're at the end of the agenda. Is there anything else from anyone? Otherwise, we'll end here. Cool, thanks all, and sorry for not keeping track of time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.